I then ran a company called the Cyclops Foundry as an engineer in Albert Street. Again, this wasn't very successful, and so he did other things. He went to Ireland and got involved in pumping out a flooded mine to try and recover it, and that didn't work out. So he ended up in London in not very good circumstances. He lived in a rather nasty part of London looking for work, and so this is where the family connection comes in. Obviously, he connected with Charles Bright in 1856, and he met Bright, you know, as well as being Bright's wife's cousin. He met Bright at the wedding, at family occasions. And of course, Bright is now putting on the project of the century to lay the Atlantic cable starting in 1856. And a 2,000-mile run of cable, 20 times longer than anything that had ever been laid before. And so Bright hires Clifford. And Clifford is described in Bright's biography as a mechanical engineer of considerable experience. By this time, he's in his 30s. He's worked at a lot of things, not altogether successfully, not, in many cases, not through any fault of his own, certainly not through any lack of talent. So he was hired on, and there's a note in one of the books that says the manufacture of the paying out machinery arranged by Mr. Bright has been carried out under the superintendence of Mr. Henry Clifford, whose experience and talent in mechanical engineering has proved of great service to the company. So now he's working on the project. And of course, the 1857 expedition failed. They lost the cable, they couldn't recover it, they gave up for the year. They came back in 1858, improved the machinery, had more success laying the cable. They did complete the cable, but because of various electrical problems in the cable and some other factors, it only worked for about 3 weeks and then failed. But even while Henry was out on these voyages, we were quite busy. He was drawing, and this, again, it was the story of the century. So the Illustrated London News, Leslie's Weekly, Harper's, every newspaper was publishing stories on it. And no photographs at the time, or there were photographs, there was no reproduction of photographs in newspapers. It was all done by woodcuts from line drawings. So apparently what they did, the Illustrated London News, got some of Henry's sketches, and they'd gone through a terrible storm on the ship. And this is the cable hold. You can see men falling about the cable. The ship was heeled over. They were in a storm for a week, apparently, out in the middle of the Atlantic in August in 1858. Just almost a disaster. The ship was almost sunk. And Henry's there sketching away at it. When he gets back, he presumably sells these sketches to the paper. And here's another one showing the coals all over the place. That was on the Agamemnon, yeah, the British ship. There were two ships involved. The Niagara was the American ship, and the Agamemnon, the British ship, both led by the Navy. And here's the ship heeled over. Now, in fact, I've showed this a similar image before, because this is as published in the newspaper, and this is Henry Clifford's own painting of it. And you can see, actually, the newspaper really perhaps exaggerates a little bit how far the ship was actually. I mean, this is bad enough, okay, but they said, well, let's make it a little more dramatic. And, I don't think you could recover from that, in fact. But so what Henry did when he got back, he did an oil painting, of course, and this is his oil painting of the Agamemnon in the storm on the 1858 expedition. But so come 1865, and they raised more money, and they chartered the Great Eastern, and they need more cable machinery. And by now, they've laid a lot more cables, and a lot more short to medium length cables, so they got a much better idea of what you need for machinery. So Clifford, again, designs the machinery. And in 1865, the company contracted with William Russell, the war correspondent of the London Times, to write a book on the project. And he took with him the watercolor artist Robert Dudley, who was, again, a good artist. And Dudley did a whole series of watercolors, which were then converted into lithographs and published in the book. And just a side note here, Cyrus Field, the man behind this, eventually bought the watercolors from Dudley. Cyrus Field gave them to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, where they immediately put them in the basement in 1891 and left them there ever since. And they've recently actually scanned them, and you can view them on their website. But this is typical of Dudley's paintings. And this is a view of the cable engine on the Great Eastern. And this is a very sophisticated machine, because what you need to do, you've got this cable perhaps 1.5 inches in diameter and weighing several tons per mile, and you're going to drop it 2 miles down in the ocean. So there's a considerable weight of cable going off the end of the ship that has to be controlled. And what they do, they run it in a convoluted path through this machinery, which is steam-driven machinery, and it has braking mechanisms, and it basically pays out the cable very slightly faster than you're steaming ahead. So you're getting a little bit of slack in the cable, which is allowed for in the calculations. And so this is the machinery that Henry Clifford designed for 1865. And what happened in 1865 was the cable broke off about 600 miles off Newfoundland, and they almost recovered the end. They were able to grapple for it and catch it and haul it up. they hadn't thought they would need to do that. So they didn't have strong enough lifting tackle, and they eventually had to abandon it. So they buoyed it off, went back and made another 2,000 miles of cable, came back in 1866 with even better machinery and equipment to pick up, and they laid the cable straight through from Ireland to Newfoundland, went back and picked up the end of the previous year's cable, spliced on a new piece and finished that one, and they now had 2 working cables, and that was the beginning of permanent communication between America and Europe. So, as we know, Clifford's still painting, and so this brings us back to where we came in, because I said 1866 is the painting that I bought, was the one that he did. And I'm now in England, so I make an appointment at the National Maritime Museum, just upriver from where the cables were made, literally a half mile upriver. And Clifford actually became chief engineer at the Telegraph Construction and Maintenance Company, which was the cable that made and laid these Atlantic cables. And he was chief engineer until he retired in 1892. So he worked for 36 years in the cable industry. So, well, let me take a look at his paintings that the National Maritime Museum has, and they also listed some of his watercolors in the catalogue. So I get in touch with the museum, and you think, okay, well, you go to the museum, you say, where are the paintings? Oh, thanks, you might let me look at them. Of course, the problem is most museums have almost all of their stock in storage. There are a tiny amount of stuff, and the National Maritime Museum, sadly, has almost nothing on display on cables. So what you have to do, you have to make an appointment, okay? And they have these, what we call these off-site storage facilities. So they said it's in the off-site storage. I said, well, where is it? I'm just trying to get it. Is it close to me? Well, we can't tell you until you sign the papers. Okay, now in the papers, you have to agree that you won't publish the material without permission, which is fine. And also they say that you can take photographs for reference within the building, but the photographs must not show the location of any item within the building itself. So you can't pinpoint the £10 million painting that's in storage and it's over there on the 4th rack in. So you can take close-up pictures, but not any pictures that would show the layout of the place. So okay, fair enough, you know. So so it's I'll have a couple more pictures, but so you know, considering how much material they have and the value of it, that's unreasonable. But so where is it? So okay, well, if you go down the street about half a mile, look out for the tile warehouse on the left. And when you see the tile warehouse, walk past it and make a left down the alley, and then there's an unmarked door. Okay, I thought, okay. So I walked past, and I wasn't sure if that was the door, and I'm looking at it, turn around, there's a security guard beckoning to me, and said, "You're looking for the museum?" And he takes me, and there's a guard there and the curator. And the curator very kindly got the paintings ready for me. Now the way is, if you imagine a room about the length of this by about to where we are here, and on each side of it, there are pull-out racks, just wire mesh racks about 6 feet by 6 feet, and you pull them out on rollers, and there are paintings on each side of them, and they stretch just as far as the eye can see down both sides of the room. So she had the racks pulled out for me, and they just have the fluorescent light every 12 feet in this room, and she has a hand light that she holds up like this to the painting so I can photograph it. And here's one of his other paintings of the Great Eastern with a cable buoy being launched to mark the spot on the cable. And this is one of his studies again. So he did a painting from this one, and so there's again from that same boy signed H. Clifford in the corner, and then he did an oil from this when he got back. So and I also they showed me all his watercolors, and you know they were similar to the style of the one I saw. Some of them cable related, some of them just scenery, and scenes around Ireland and elsewhere on cable voyages. But I was thinking, so you know, in theory, all of Clifford's material had gone to either the National Maritime Museum. These paintings were donated in 1947, and then Uncle Tony, the historian, had donated more material in the 1980s, and he'd also said the rest of the material was to go to the Hull Museum. So how come I've got a little painting and some watercolors and the engineering seal, and you know, where did that stuff come from? So I told you I'd been in touch with Clifford's great-granddaughter, J.C. Wall, who lives in Devon. And she's also an artist. She's a textile artist and a fine artist. Her great-uncle was an artist and her uncle was an architect, so it's obviously an artistic family. And she also has some material, including some more Great Eastern paintings. And she's actually the last of the family. She's the last surviving descendant. It's obviously not a prolific family. Our uncle Tony, the historian, had no children. And he had decided, he'd asked J.C. would she like the stuff, and she was in her 20s, recently married at this time. You know, starting a family, and she didn't have a family, you know, married and starting a household, and she didn't feel she could take on the responsibility of this vast archive of material. So Uncle Tony arranged to donate it. And he made the arrangements that, when he died, it would go to the Hull Museum, mainly, because of the family's connections there. But unfortunately, the museum kind of dropped the ball on this. I've seen the correspondence on it, and they agreed to it, and then they kind of just let it slide. And the next thing in the museum's files in Hull is a letter from Tony Clifford's solicitor saying, we understand our client left instruction you should get some material. And they send a van down, they bring some stuff back, and there's the stuff that I've seen. And a lot of stuff doesn't get collected. And meantime, because they've been a bit lackadaisical, Tony Clifford has contacted the National Maritime Museum and said, would you like the cable-related material rather than the shipbuilding and family material? And they've taken an archive of cable material, which is all of Clifford's employment contracts, letters from Kelvin and Willie and all the other cable guys, photographs that he's taken, all the newspapers published on the Great Eastern, his bound sets of those, and they're all at the National Maritime Museum in the archives. But there was still a lot of stuff left over. And what JC told me, what happened was that Tony Clifford had remarried later in life, and to put it kindly, the woman was kind of a money grubber, younger woman. And when he died, the museum took what they thought were entitled to, and she just everything else, put it into an auction house in Cornwall, and it was all sold up in the 1980s. So what's happening is the material is now coming around again, and I bought some of it, Jim Cruz has bought some, there's another lot up in England at the moment. So it's kind of a sad story in that regard, but at least I found quite a bit of it. I have a fairly comprehensive page on my website. So back to Henry Clifford, the family history, which Tony Clifford wrote, ends in the 1870s, so it's got a tremendous amount of material on Henry's involvement with the Atlantic cables. And then his life becomes kind of routine. This is the chief engineer. He takes out some patents on machinery. He has a key patent in cable protection in, I think, 1880. And the problem with laying cables in the tropics is there's a marine borer called the teredo worm, and it likes the taste of the gutta percha insulation. And it would work its way through the chinks in the steel armoring, eat through the gutta percha until it hit the copper core, and then stop. And of course, you shorted the cable. And Clifford worked out that if you took a brass tape and spiral wrapped it around the insulation, that would stop the worms getting in. And he had the patent on that, and everybody took it up. So that was a very successful patent, and he took that in his own name, even though he was working in the industry. I guess at that time you could still take patents in your own name and have the rights to them. And he did really quite well out of that. So Clifford worked at Telcon, Telegraph Maintenance Company, until his retirement in 1892 when he was 71. He continued to live in London, not far from the cable works, and he died in 1905, sorry, at the age of 83. And showing how successful he was, his estate was probated at £89,000. Now, the British government just released probate rights. I've just found this last week. And so he left £89,000, which doesn't sound like a lot, but actually if you scale it up by their calculators, it's about $8 million. So really quite a respectable sum for an artist turned engineer. And he painted and took photographs for the rest of his life, and he had really a very successful career. And that's Henry Clifford, cable engineer and artist. Thank you.